they don't see the targeted group as human anymore. They can say, well, we don't commit any atrocities against humanity because this group isn't human. They're monsters. They're the ones who are committing school shootings. They're indoctrinating our children.
We encourage every American trans person to have a passport. We talk to many people who believe that you have to be both wealthy and a rocket scientist in order to get out. That is not true. The world's a big place. Come join the party.
Hey fam, it's me, Amara. Welcome to the TransLash podcast, a show where we tell trans stories to save trans lives. Well, this month is the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. And we at TransLash are taking a look at what it means for trans people in our Trans 250 series. Today, we're going to talk about an uncomfortable truth on the nation's birthday. According to experts at the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention, America could be in the middle of a genocide against trans people right now. So clearly, this is not an easy conversation, but we believe that we can't celebrate America without facing reality. But because this will be a tough episode, we do urge you to take care of yourselves as you move through today's conversation with us. So take breaks, pause listening, just do what you have to do. Unpacking all of this with us today is Émilie Weidl from the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention to help us understand why they are sounding the alarm. Then we'll hear from Anne Ogborn, the director of Trans Rescue. Trans Rescue is an organization that helps trans, intersex, and queer people move from dangerous places to safer parts of the world. I'm so glad to be joined today by Émilie Weidl. Émilie is the director of research at the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention and Human Security. There, she primarily contributes to research on LGBTQIA+ issues and content related to the war in Gaza. Émilie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so glad to be able to speak to the work that we at Lemkin are doing and to hopefully bring more awareness to the issues that we're trying to cover over there.
So first of all, for people who may not be familiar, what is the Lemkin Institute and who was its namesake, Raphael Lemkin?
So Raphael Lemkin was actually the creator of the term genocide. And he created this term following his personal experiences because he was Jew during the Holocaust. And the Lemkin Institute, we try to continue his legacy. So what we do is that we employ his academic work. So he not only created the term, but he left behind this whole breadth of academic work around genocide and what genocide is and what genocide prevention can look like and the different forms that genocide takes. So we ourselves are an entirely volunteer-run and staffed genocide prevention organization, and we employ genocide prevention tools to analyze relevant events that are happening right now and to raise awareness. We also regularly work directly with grassroots and community-led organizations to bring awareness to genocides and genocidal actions that are not receiving any attention in the mainstream media. And what our main goal usually is to use our platform to pressure those who are in positions of power and who have the power to stop genocide in its tracks, to leverage their power to do so. Because we know that there are people who have the power to stop these actions, and they just often don't have the political will to do so.
So as you mentioned, he had personal experience during World War II, fled Poland, ended up at Duke University, literally is the person who's credited with creating the word genocide, which is actually a Latin and a Greek word combined, which means, killing of an entire group or of a tribe. And went on actually to be working on the prosecution of Nazis after World War II. So we're talking about a person who's instrumental literally to the creation of the concept of genocide. So I just wanted to make sure, because it's not a household name and quite clearly should be.
He also campaigned for the Genocide Convention, which is currently the large international treaty that we have, which prohibits genocide and calls on states and requires states to stop genocide when there is an actual risk of it occurring.
Right. And one of the most important things, and I think this is really relevant to our conversation, is that when you read the Genocide Convention, and I think one of the most interesting things about it is that it is written so that anyone can read it. It is not sort of an esoteric legal treatise. It is a very clearly worded and defined document, and I think probably made accessible so that people could understand, anyone could understand. Like if you are, the lowest member of the military without rank, and someone asks you to do something, you could literally go to the Convention on Genocide and read it and see whether or not it's something that you should be doing. Like it is very, very, very clear. But one of the things that is a part of that clarity is that it describes genocide not as an event, but as a process, right? We normally think that, for example, the murder of 800,000 Rwandans or the murder of 6 million plus Jews during World War II is itself genocide, but that's the tail end of the genocidal process and project, right? And one of the things that the Convention on Genocide seeks to do is to describe the process so that people can see it happening before the worst happens.
Yes, and I think that that's one of the biggest, misconceptions about genocide. And it's good that the Genocide Convention doesn't entrench that misconception, but that misconception is still widely held, even across those who claim to understand the Genocide Convention. They claim that genocide is only this mass extermination or this mass killing of people, like those two examples that you cited. And so in the lead up to that, or in processes that also contribute to the destruction of a group and to the destruction of that group's identity and their way of life, people will say, well, that's not genocide because I don't see this mass killing occurring. But we at Lemkin, one of the things that we really try to do is to explain to everybody and to put out informational tools saying that genocide isn't an act, it is a process. And the way that we identify it is by looking for specific patterns that have cropped up across historical genocides and which can come at different times of a genocide. They could come in different forms and they can overlap with one another because no two genocides are the exact same. And so if we are looking for an exact carbon copy of one from the past, we're never going to find another example of one.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I think that is precisely the point because it takes place in different times, in different cultures, different geographies, but the end results can often be the same. So as a part of this unearthing of the idea of genocide as a process, one of the things that you all do is that you have what you call sort of essentially the 10 markers of genocide.
Yeah. So on the website, on our Lemkin website, we have a page that describes the 10 patterns of genocide that we have identified. And these are the 10 patterns that we're looking for when we look to events that are happening, mass, human rights violations or a massacre that has occurred, and trying to see if any of those 10 patterns are present. And the way that those were identified is by looking at previous historical examples of genocide and also looking at Raphael Lemkin's work to come up with what patterns keep cropping up and what can we say, okay, this action fits into one of these patterns and therefore is genocidal in nature. And like I was saying before, obviously no two processes are the same. And for that reason, some other organizations might use a conception of genocide that's more of a step-based one and saying, okay, first step one happens and then step two happens and so forth. But the problem with that is that those steps never really occur in the same manner. They oftentimes overlap or they happen out of order. And so it's very difficult to kind of say we're at this part of the genocide when all of a sudden you're at step 8 and you were just at step 2, right? But when you're looking for patterns, they can occur at the same time. They can occur at different times. They can overlap with one another. And even if only one of them is present, we can say there's genocidal action occurring. We can put out a red flag alert for genocide in that area, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's an active genocide occurring. It means that we're at some part in a process of a genocide.
So in looking at the 10 patterns of genocide, The Lemkin Institute has issued 3 red alerts about genocide that's happening in America against trans people. We'll come to the most recent one in just a minute, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the thinking behind the very first one. Why did you issue it at the time you did? Because, in many ways, one could argue that the patterns of genocide actually started during the first Trump administration, for example, or in 2019. Like, there are all of these, moments that we've actually laid out at TransLash where, there are lots of different places where you could have started the clock. Why did you start the clock at the first red alert when you did?
Well, first off, just to be clear, I, as you mentioned in the beginning, I started at Lemkin in 2023. So it can't necessarily speak to everything that occurred before I was there. And also, Lemkin is a fairly new organization. And with all the caveats of that, we are entirely volunteer run. We are very small. Our team sometimes is as small as 6 active people. And so the amount of work that we put out is really the most amount of work that we could physically put out for people who have day jobs or who are students. I'm a PhD student at the moment, for example. All that being said, Lemkin began sounding the alarm about the gender critical movement and its genocidal rhetoric and plans for the trans community, and not just in the US, right? Because we know that the gender critical movement is global.
There's one you issued.
We know that it
UK.
has, it's funding a lot of genocidal legislation and policies all across the globe, and not just against trans people, but also against women, against really anybody who's not a cis man is being targeted by these policies, right? And also against children, because they're trying to ban books as well, and they're trying to, especially trans youth, but children in general, they're trying to impose restrictions on their ability to express themselves. So the Lemkin Institute became very concerned about the gender critical movement and published a piece about this in 2022. And that piece was entitled Statement on the Genocidal Nature of the Gender Critical Movement's Ideology and Practice. And then in the lead up specifically to the November 2024 US election, Lemkin had noticed that there was a really fast and almost meteoric rise of transphobic thought and movements all across the US. And this was happening very quickly. And so as soon as the election happened, and the Trump administration, which had been leveraging a lot of that transphobic language in order to gain support and also to manipulate his voter base, once they came into power, we knew that that would not be a good thing for the trans community, and that a lot of those gender critical ideas would become policy at the federal level. We know that there had already been a lot of movement occurring at the state level, but now we knew that it was moving to the party in power at the federal level. And so that's when we decided something needs to be said, and we're worried about what this is going to have as an impact across the entirety of the country.
So it was basically the run-up to the 2024 election in the U.S. that kind of kicked off the first one. I mean, there are, as you say, other ones that you have issued, such as, I think, in 2025, focused on the United Kingdom. We know the situation there has only deteriorated. But in March of this year, so just, several months ago, you all issued a red alert for the United States, which said that the United States, with respect to trans people, was in either the late, early, or the middle stages of genocide. And one of the things that was prompting you all to ring the alarm was what you describe as the erasure, essentially, of trans identity, which, according to your research, signals the possibility of greater persecution. Can you just talk a little bit about what really set off the alarm bells at that particular point in March?
So we've published 3 red flag alerts since the November 2024 election. And I think that the reason that we want to keep doing it is because the situation obviously keeps getting worse. And around, I believe, late January to early February of this year, we said, okay, things have escalated again, and we need another statement. And the reason for this was because we were seeing the move towards banning of gender-affirming care, which was initially restricted mostly to children, to youth, right? That was one of the first things that happened following the 2024 election, was this focus on banning gender-affirming care for youth. We saw that it was now being moved towards banning gender-affirming care for everyone, regardless of age. And that was really, really concerning to see. And we also saw that some strategic litigation against these gender-affirming care bans was beginning to lose. And for instance, we saw the Skrmetti decision, and it seemed that the courts were not going to entirely prevent this from happening, which was, I mean, obviously we never thought the courts are going to be perfect, right? Never want to assume that. But Skrmetti was a very upsetting decision that came out, and it kind of cemented this idea that these gender-affirming care bans were not only going to be passed, but they were going to continue. They were going to pass, constitutional muster, and they were going to spread. And then we saw that they were beginning to spread to adults. And we also saw an explosion of rhetoric in the latter half, or even the last quarter, I believe, of 2025, about trans people being incredibly violent. And this idea of labeling anybody who practices radical gender ideology, which is a very broad term and could be used to describe anybody who believes that trans people exist even, as domestic terrorists. And this together, we thought definitely warranted a statement, because this fits into the pattern, right? The pattern of denial of identity. It's this idea that they're imposing an alien identity onto trans people by banning them from accessing gender-affirming care, and then also criminalizing not only trans identity, but also trans support and allyship.
Yeah, and it's pretty broad. I mean, it's the criminalization of identity through the denial of identity with regards to identification in Kansas and elsewhere, a couple of other states, others with pending legislation, not to mention restricting the ability to travel with regards to the denial of passports for trans people, which fits into that. In certain places such as Florida, denying trans people certain types of employment, such as the ability to be teachers. I mean, like, the list really is broad. But I think that one of the things that is really important to underscore here is one of the things that you touched upon, which is the fact that the possibility that the federal government will label trans organizations as terrorists then opens the door to a much broader crackdown. I don't really know of another way to say it, a crackdown on people, institutions, and all the rest of it. I mean, we've seen that with other groups in the United States. I mean, is that one of the ones that really, keeps you up at night?
Yeah, no, for sure. At Lemkin, we're definitely worried about this expansion of this domestic terrorism label to anybody who supports certain communities or who forms part of certain communities, right? There's a reason that none of our statements are authored, and that we protect the identity of all of our volunteers. And those who say that they don't want to be identified, they don't want to be public, they're not on a website. Their names are nowhere to be found. Now, that's because a lot of our volunteers are based in the States, and our organization is based in the States. And it's really scary to hear about a lot of people who are involved in trans advocacy, and their whole goal is to help communities. And now that goal of helping their own community or helping the community of people that they care about is being labeled as terrorism. And like you said, this label of terrorism, which has become very popular over the past, 25 years since the war on terror has begun, is incredibly useful because it allows government to take basically any action that they want to take, because terrorism is considered such a heinous offense and such a horrible thing. And so it's a way that certain civil rights can be curtailed, because if somebody's labeled a terrorist, they no longer deserve those rights, such as the right to a fair trial or the right not to be detained without cause, etc.
Yeah. And we know that in other places, like, for example, in Nazi Germany, one of the things that presaged a wider crackdown was this denial, for example, of passports to anyone, in the late 1930s, to anyone who was of Jewish origin, literally not giving them papers so that they could leave the country. And I think that this is one of the reasons why, sometimes people are like, why are people kind of obsessed with papers? And it's because in modern bureaucratic societies, that determines how you're recognized. And if you are not recognized as an equal citizen by the state, then that exposes you to an entire array of potential bad things happening. And one of the things that you point out in your paper was, what happened to indigenous people in the United States, who were also not accorded equal status, and were therefore then allowed to be victimized in some really key ways.
One of the things that definitely spurred on one of our earlier red flag alerts on this subject, and I mean, the new policy that made it so future passports had to correspond to assigned sex at birth, was something that came out very early on in this administration, right? And then it was later on allowed by the courts. Okay, so when that happened, we were already very obviously worried, because that means that trans people, for example, who have a passport that gives a gender marker that doesn't correspond in any way whatsoever with their outward appearance, could have a hard time traveling or getting on a plane. And we have seen examples of this, right? And that prevents people from being able to exit the country or even just being able to travel, right? Freedom of movement is something that everybody is meant to enjoy. And now we're seeing the same thing happening at the state level, with many states invalidating. So they're not only making it for future driver's license, they're invalidating trans people's current driver's license and making it so they can't have a driver's license that corresponds to their lived reality. And like you said, this is very similar to things that we've seen in other historical genocides. And we also see in current genocides right now, and for many, many years in Palestine and in Israel, Palestinians have a certain color-coded ID that corresponds to where they are allowed to exist, where they're allowed to travel, where they're allowed to live. And it makes it very easy for somebody to see that they have the wrong color ID and to scoop them up, right? And
That's
to, prosecute them for being in the wrong place or trying to enter the wrong place. And this is a very common genocidal tactic, because it allows for tracking of the group. And it also allows for easy identification. It's forced outing for trans people is what it is in many ways. And that really, really terrified us to see that, because we know what the consequences of that could be further on. And we also know that even if that consequence doesn't become realized, any forced outing of a trans person puts them in a vulnerable position. It makes them vulnerable to violence, whether that be physical or verbal, but a lot of times it does happen to be physical violence that they are subjected to once they have been forcibly outed, which is definitely a consequence that a lot of the people who pass these bills are aware of, and they simply don't care, or they are happy that this is a possible consequence.
One of the things that I find astounding, and I wonder if this is true for other genocides, and maybe you can shed some light on this, is that part of the reason why people may be slow to act, because one of the things that you mentioned is that the reason why Lemkin Institute does these things is to spur action and awareness. But that right now, which is kind of impeding people's ability to act, is that they think that it simply can't be happening here. Like that it's 2026, it's America's 250th, the country is shrouded in its own myth of itself, and that myth is actually preventing people from seeing what's right before them. I'm wondering, as a person who studied genocide, what your reflection is on that. I mean, are we unique in that? Or is that what generally happens, where there is literally a denial on the part of the society where the genocide is taking place, that it's actually happening?
Yeah. So as an outsider, so I'm not American. I'm from Canada and I live in the United Kingdom. So as an outsider, I do see a lot of this rhetoric happen where Americans will stand in the face of horrific injustices, right? Of concentration camps currently being built to house undocumented migrants and say, well, this is the land of the free, right? We have protection. Mm-hmm. Even though they're seeing the complete opposite of that happening right in front of their eyes. But this is not unique to the US. This is something that happens in every country. Canada is not an exception, right? We on an international stage are renowned for our human rights record, which is very questionable. So I think you are right in that this is very common in genocides. And one of the reasons that happens is because genocides are preceded by a dehumanization of the targeted group, right? They're preceded by a lot of propaganda and by the government teaching its citizens that the targeted group are not human. The population that is either silent or either complicit by inaction or oftentimes ends up participating in the genocide itself, they don't see the targeted group as human anymore. And so they can say, well, we don't commit any atrocities against humanity because this group isn't human. They're monsters. They're the ones who are committing school shootings. They're indoctrinating our children. They are animals, right? In Nazi Germany, the population was convinced that the Jewish community were rats, right? Or cockroaches. So it's easier to ignore the things that are going on in front of your eyes when you've been conditioned to not believe that the people who are being targeted are humans.
No, that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. And you see it before every atrocity in history. Lastly, I'm wondering, the work of the Institute is designed to raise awareness because, as you said at the outset, that the whole point is to let people know what's happening so that the worst doesn't have to happen, right? And we all have to remember that because genocide is a process, not an event, that there's so many places along the way where the worst can actually be stopped because it's a process, not an event. So it's not hopeless, but it does require people to wake up. What's the hope you have from the work that you're doing? And what you hope listeners will apply to help be a part of the solution for the worst to not happen?
Yeah, that's a bit of a loaded question. Coming to somebody who works in genocide prevention, because let me tell you, it's not obviously you're experiencing, a horrible thing that's happening to your community, right? And this podcast is probably both an outlet of joy, and it's also doing the research and talking to people like me and talking to people who have similar expertise or talking about similar issues is a very difficult thing to do, right? And being buried in this research and this writing day after day can take its toll on the people working at an organization. But at the same time, Lemkin is also a source of hope because we can look around and see that all of our work reaches to very far places, right? And we see a lot of response from people, especially from trans people, saying this made a difference in my day, or this gave me hope, or thank you for, speaking on these issues. It is a very dark time, right now in the world for almost everybody. And I think that the hope that I see is in the communities that we are building in resistance, right? And through this work, we've been reached out to by many organizations who are working for and with trans Americans to build community, to help them get out. But we also have spoken to people who don't necessarily want to leave. They have a life, they have a family, they have a support system, and they are building their own community within the country at the moment. And so I think that the best thing that we can do from now on is to lean on each other and to pool all of our resources and our knowledge to make sure that we find everybody who needs that help and that we build up a resistance that is powerful enough to stop this genocide in its tracks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've spoken to a lot of people who have either lived through similar circumstances or have studied it, such as yourself. And I asked them, what's the number one thing that people can do? And to a person, they have answered, get to know your neighbors. Thank you so much for joining us to discuss, not an easy topic, but an essential one, especially at this moment. You can't fix problems that you don't acknowledge. And at this particular moment, I think a place like the Lemkin Institute sounding the alarm about the early or middle stage of genocide against trans people in the United States is essential. Thank you so much, Émilie.
Thank you so much. The work you do is so important, and I'm so happy that you were willing to have us on here. Thank you.
Of course. That was genocide researcher Émilie Weidl. Just a program note, our guest Anne Ogborn will be expressing her assessment for how people should be responding to a potential genocide. I want to underscore that not all situations are equivalent and that everyone will have to decide what's best for them. Next up on the show, I'll be speaking with the director of Trans Rescue, Anne Ogborn. But first, we're taking a quick break to bring you some trans joy. For those of you who don't know, Trans Joy is where we highlight a trans person who's doing important work in their community and how that work brings them joy and joy to all of us. Today, we're highlighting Kate Isett. Kate Isett is a trans woman from Texas. In 2025, she made the decision to leave the United States and seek asylum in Barcelona, Spain. While preparing to move, she kept track of all of the steps that she took, and she used that experience to found LGBTQ FAR, a nonprofit that provides resources to trans people navigating displacement, relocation, and asylum-related challenges. Here's Kate to tell us more.
2025 was just a really, really scary year. Being in Texas was incredibly scary. And it was like the shift happened overnight as far as the cultural outlook on trans individuals go. And I started seeing the writing on the wall. I tried to flee to Chicago initially, and then suddenly the National Guard was moving in, ICE was moving in, and I said, okay, it's time to leave the country now. My friends thought I was absolutely insane. A lot of them tried to honestly kind of gaslight me into saying that things weren't that bad. And I think that they were really worried about me starting over. But honestly, I got sober about 8 years ago, so I've started over then. I came out 4 or 5 years ago. I started over then. So I was like, guys, when have you ever known me to do something half-assed? But then also, this is nothing new to me. In Spain, I feel safe. I most notably and most frequently probably say that I just feel invisible here. Every single day, whenever I get onto the metro, it's not just me, this gender nonconforming individual. I see tons of us around. So I think that that's the biggest thing, is just blending and being invisible and being treated like I'm a human first and not like, oh, we need to dance around conversations, or just generally people not feeling comfortable around people like me.
Kate Isett, you are trans joy. Do you know someone like Kate who embodies trans joy? Well, send us an email at translash_podcast@translash.org and make sure to include their name, contact information, and why you think they should get a shout out in a future Trans Joy segment. One more quick note. No, your eyes aren't fooling you. We've had a little change of scene. I've had to record this one from home, so excuse the switch up, and welcome to my place. I'm so glad to be joined today by Anne Ogborn. Anne is the director of Trans Rescue, where she works to get trans people out of dangerous situations worldwide. And thank you so much for joining me.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Trans Rescue works to move trans people to safer situations. I am wondering what your reaction is that increasingly the United States is moving on to the list of places that are dangerous for trans people. I mean, specifically, as we were talking about in this episode, that at the nation's 250th anniversary, there is a report by the Lemkin Institute which says that the United States is in the process of a genocide against trans people. I mean, how does that strike you as a person from the States and who works to move trans people out of places that are dangerous?
Our genesis was as a informal group that was going to set up a website and help provide information for people to help get out of the United States. That was kind of the pre-Trans Rescue genesis of it all. We do work closely with the Lemkin Institute. I've spoken with the Lemkin Institute in the last 48 hours. They're very helpful in helping us gauge when to sound what alarm. They have better facilities for evaluating, and reading the tea leaves. It's distressing that they have issued genocide alerts. Our current policy is every trans person has to kind of read the tea leaves for themselves. If you don't feel like you want to read the tea leaves and you would like to find out what we're seeing, we are suggesting that every trans person should get out of the United States physically now, and then arrange their affairs so that they can stay out from outside the United States. The reason we say that is not conditions in the United States, but rather our concern that the Trump administration is in the habit of moving suddenly and with little regard for process. As a result, it's quite possible that they would simply one day, for example, invalidate all trans people's passports, trapping them in the United States. Our goal is to prevent the situation that has happened in the past in the run-up to genocides. Lemkin Institute, the genocide scholars in general, call this containment, where prior to a genocide, a population's ability to move.
For those people that need and or want to leave, what does that process look like? How has it worked for people that you've helped?
First step is to get emotionally and personally get ready to come to accept that you're going to move and do your planning and get your ducks in order, and then and get a passport. Obviously, we encourage every American trans person to have a passport. If it's Trump passport, it's a Trump passport, but have a passport. Then make a plan and execute it. There are a couple of things we do that are very helpful in making a plan. One is that every Saturday we have office hours. Saturday, midday, depending on what time zone you're in. You can call in. It's an open video call, and we'll talk with you about your plans to leave. Talk with you if you have left. Talk with you about your fears, wherever you are. We also have just published a book entitled How to Get Out. And that's available as a PDF through our website. And our website has a bunch of other information as well. Once you have a plan, execute it. For most people, that comes down to, where can I get a visa? And that a lot of that depends on your occupation, honestly. We talk to many people who believe that you have to be both wealthy and, a rocket scientist in order to get out. That is not true. Many countries have a shortage occupation list that's pretty modest. There are lots of educational opportunities, and there's lots of ways to just leave. We believe that anybody can get out. I was once homeless, and if I were back there being homeless and it was now, I could have gotten myself out.
Where in the world have you helped people move from that you think illustrates where the United States could be headed? Like, what's a place on the planet where you've helped people move from, where you say, this is what it could be like, and this is what it was like for trans people in that particular place?
Egypt. The United States is beginning to resemble Egypt. And we move lots of people out of Egypt. It is beginning to resemble it because the police are becoming more violent and lawless, because religion is becoming a big part of what the law de facto is, and because it is getting harder and harder to get through the borders. If the U.S. continues on this same path, that's what it will look like. And that's not a very happy place to be.
And where are places that you think are safe?
Europe is safe. Much of the world is actually safe. When I left the United States, I went to India. I got a computer job in India for a year. Lots of the world is safe. Lots of places in South America. Lots of places in Southeast Asia. And honestly, the UK, we're worried about the direction. Once again, we're always worried about containment. Australia's fine. I'm here in the Netherlands. I do not have a real, I don't have a get out plan.
Yeah, I guess the ground is shifting really fast and can shift fast. So for example, we know there's the AfD that's rising in Germany that could possibly sweep to power. The right could sweep to power in France.
I am 8 kilometers from Germany, and
You're not concerned at all.
Concerned. I am not concerned at all. One thing you have to understand is the difference between the United States, which is what's called a first past the post system, in which whoever gets more than half the votes gets everything, and proportional representation. It's true that these right-wing parties may be on the rise, but they generally have trouble forming a government if they do. In fact, we had AfD. We had Geert Wilders briefly here in the Netherlands, and it wasn't able to keep going, and it swung back. So that makes the country much more stable.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that the point here is that wherever you're deciding to go, you have to know what the circumstances are and the relative points of safety there, right? So a part of your work, a lot of this work is heavy because you have to face really uncomfortable truths. You're dealing with people who are in desperate circumstances, who have to get out of where they are. It's extremely heavy work.
And it's dangerous. We try and avoid going into dangerous places, but we can't always. And
so, but how do you keep?
I've done it several times myself.
Where have you gone that's dangerous? And when you say, do you mean that you physically go get people? It's not only directing them out of the country.
Yeah, I've physically gone into dangerous countries. I've gone into the Maghreb.
In North Africa.
And I've gone into, and I spent most of 2023 in East Africa, moving around amongst countries. But I had guns pointed at me and lots of very scary things. And yeah, that's the reality for us. We do lots of scary stuff. We've had a number of our staff jailed or tortured
for doing this work.
Yeah.
What keeps you going then? I mean, if everything that you've described so far is extremely heavy, it's been harrowing personally for people that you know. Like, there has to be sort of a hope that is fueling you, or maybe it's not. I mean, what is fueling you to keep going?
There's 186 people walking around on this earth who wouldn't be there if it wasn't for us. Plus however many we've gotten out of the United States and the UK. So, if anything, I'm trapped. Because how could I walk away?
In doing this work and where things could be headed, in the US, which is what we're focusing on, but maybe elsewhere as well, what's the thing that keeps you up at night? Like, what's the thing that you really worry about?
Honestly, the thing I am most terrified of, and we work in Saudi Arabia, we work in Uganda, we work in Ghana, we work in Nigeria, we work in Afghanistan, and the one that absolutely terrifies me is that the U.S. will shut off passports. That terrifies me.
Right. Because in other places where that's happened for a group of people, that's the strongest signal that you're on the path to the worst of a genocide. I mean, that's been the trend in history. How is what you're doing for you tied to the activism that you've done in the trans community for decades, since the 80s and 90s? Like, how do you see then versus now, and why you've decided to respond in the way that you are now with Trans Rescue?
Good activists are motivated by love of the people. And when I came out back in the 1980s, the thing that saved me was other trans people. And so I've been wanting to help trans people ever since. That's where my life has largely gone.
Lastly, the decision to leave ultimately comes down to being an emotional one. Like, you have to.
It does.
Yeah. How do you suggest people prepare emotionally, since that's the biggest first obstacle to overcome?
I have a brother, And like, he visited me one time in Washington State or in Oregon. And that was the biggest trip of his life. And so his world is very different. To come from Kansas to Oregon, that's very different than my world, where I flew into Bangalore one time and realized I only had $20 in cash on me. And I'd gotten on a plane to Bangalore. Lots of people are scared. Lots of people are doing things so they don't have to deal with scary thoughts, and would like people to kind of do things that are helpful, rather than putting it off. Approach it with joy. Joy is a tremendously powerful weapon. Why would we not all want to be living the best life possible? It is the best revenge. So the world's a big place. Come join the party.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining us and for all your work and that of your network to get trans people out of dangerous places. Really appreciate it.
Don't thank me. Thank the 20-some of us who are volunteers for Trans Rescue.
Yes, that was Trans Rescue Director Anne Ogborn. Thank you for joining me on the TransLash podcast. Now listen all the way through to the end of the show for something extra. If you like what you heard, leave a comment on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You might just hear it on the show. And to prove that we actually do, here's a comment from an Instagram user about our Trans Period Pride episode. Annagale Burtz says, "Putting the men in menstruation every month. You know, we need humor at a time like this. Thanks for your comment and thanks for listening." So I like to end the show with what I'm looking forward to generally. And what I'm looking forward to this weekend is the beach. People don't realize that I live in New York City. We have beaches, more than one. It's another reason to come here, not only because you would be in a championship NBA city, you would also Liberty, the WNBA, you would also be able to have access to beaches. So yeah, beach in New York City, we got it.